They called her the ghost girl, treating her as if she were invisible. To humiliate her in front of everyone, the school's golden boy dumped a bucket of ice-cold water over her head to the cheers of his team. Alara sat there, drenched, freezing, and shattered. But the bullies didn't know a silent protector was watching from the shadows. A Navy SEAL and his K-9 partner were about to teach them the true meaning of justice. The air in Harmony Creek, Pennsylvania, was different. Thick and humid, it carried the scent of damp earth in the coming autumn, even in early September. Nestled in the rolling hills of the Rust Belt, the sky was often a soft, forgiving gray. For Alara Ellie Vance, the heavy air felt hard to breathe. Ellie was 16, new to Harmony Creek, new to the relentless green of the countryside, and new to the suffocating silence that had blanketed her life for the past 6 months, right after her father's funeral. She and her mother had moved from the coast of Maine, hoping the abrupt change of scenery might banish the gray fog of grief that clung to them both. Her mom, Rachel Vance, was a woman held together by her new nursing scrubs and an iron will. Rachel was practical, kind, and desperate for Ellie to be okay. "Try, sweetie," she'd said that morning, her eyes tired but hopeful. "Join a club. Talk to someone. These hills are beautiful. Go out and see them." Ellie was seeing them, but she saw them through the lens of her sketchbook. The sketchbook was her armor. It was a thick, spiral-bound volume filled with charcoal and pencil drawings, a barrier she held up against the world. While her mother saw landscapes, Ellie saw textures, the peeling bark of a sycamore tree, the rusted chain of a playground swing, the deep shadows under the eaves of the high school. She was sitting on a cold park bench on the edge of town long before the first bell rang, her knees drawn to her chest. Her hoodie, 2 sizes too big, was pulled up, creating a small, safe cavern. Her pencil moved swiftly, not sketching the hills, but the frantic, darting movements of a blue jay on the path. She was so focused on capturing the bird's nervous energy that she didn't notice the 2 figures approaching. Miles away, before the sun had fully cleared the tree line, Jackson Jax Riggs had already been running for an hour. His call sign was Rook, a name earned in places that didn't exist on public maps. He wasn't a veteran. He was active duty, a Navy SEAL on special family leave to settle the affairs of a family he barely knew. Harmony Creek was an inherited burden, a place he had to be, but it wasn't home. Home was discipline, movement, and the steady, silent presence at his side. Aries, a magnificent sable German shepherd, ran at his left heel, his pace effortless. Aries was not a pet. He was a trained military K-9, a partner who had saved Jax's life more than once, currently on shore leave. Just like his handler, his movements were fluid and controlled, his attention absolute. They turned into the small town park just as the morning light hit the benches. Jax saw her before Aries did. She was just a shape at first, huddled in the morning chill. But Jax was paid to see details, not shapes. He saw the oversized hoodie, the way she made herself small, the way her head snapped up when a car door slammed 2 blocks away, and how she immediately ducked her head back down, hiding behind her hair and her book. It was the deliberate invisibility of someone trying very hard not to be seen. As they passed, Aries' stride hitched for half a second. His ears swiveled, and he turned his head, sniffing the air. He smelled the sharp, metallic tang of anxiety beneath the scent of graphite and paper. He let out a low, almost inaudible whine, a sound of inquiry. "Leave it," Jax murmured, his voice a low rumble. It wasn't a reprimand, just a command. Aries immediately refocused forward. Jax didn't look back at the girl. He didn't have to. He had already logged the scene. A girl, 16 or 17, high anxiety, trying to disappear. He understood the impulse. He often felt it himself. Harmony Creek High was its own world, a loud, bright, sprawling ecosystem that felt fundamentally hostile to Ellie. At her old school, she had been quiet but known. Here she was an alien, a ghost drifting through hallways that echoed with the shouts and laughter of kids who'd known each other their entire lives. And in this ecosystem, Brody Kent was the apex predator. Brody was the town's golden boy, the quarterback with the perfect hair, the easy smile, and the casual, cruel confidence of a boy who had never been told no. His father owned half the commercial properties on Main Street, and Brody moved through the school with the absolute entitlement of a prince in his own castle. He was always surrounded by a shifting group of satellites, other players, and popular kids who orbited his charisma. They noticed Ellie the same way Jax had. But where Jax saw vulnerability to be left alone, Brody saw vulnerability to be exploited. It started with small things, a snicker when she answered a question in class, an intentional shoulder check in the cafeteria that sent her tray skittering. They were testing her, prodding the fence to see if the animal inside would bite back. Ellie never did. She would blush, stammer an apology as if it were her fault, and disappear, which only made their laughter louder. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in the chaotic crush between third and fourth periods. The hallway was a river of noise, slamming lockers, and shouted conversations. Ellie was clutching her sketchbook to her chest, trying to navigate the current toward the art room, her only sanctuary. She didn't see one of Brody's friends, a broad-shouldered lineman named Tyler, stick out his foot. Ellie stumbled, a gasp tearing from her lungs as she fought for balance. Her sketchbook, her shield, flew from her hands. It skidded across the polished linoleum floor, landing face up, open, right at Brody Kent's feet. The hallway noise seemed to shrink, the frantic movement slowing as a pocket of stillness formed around them. Brody stopped, his signature smirk spreading across his face. He looked down at the book, then at Ellie, who stood frozen, her face pale. "Well, what do we have here?" Brody said, his voice carrying easily. He bent down, not with kindness, not a gesture of help, but with the casual ownership of a king receiving tribute. He picked up the book. Ellie's breath caught. "Please," she whispered, a sound no one heard. He began flipping through the pages, his smirk widening into a laugh. "What we got here? Sad trees? Sad little birds?" He turned the book around, showing his friends. "Oh, brilliant. Look, guys." She drew the old fire hydrant. "So deep." The laughter erupted. It was sharp, like thrown stones. Ellie just stood there, her hands clenched at her sides, humiliation a hot, nauseating feeling rising in her throat. "Please," she said, this time loud enough to be heard. "Give it back." Her voice, small and trembling, only seemed to amuse him. He stopped on one page, a detailed, delicate charcoal sketch of the old town clock tower, a piece she was actually proud of. He held it up for everyone to see. "Give it back," he mimicked in a high, mocking tone. "You mean this?" He looked her dead in the eye, his own eyes cold and bright, and with 2 fingers, he slowly, deliberately tore the page in half. A collective gasp went through the small crowd. Ellie felt it like a physical blow. Brody dropped the 2 pieces, letting them flutter to the floor like dead leaves. Then he shoved the thick sketchbook back into her chest, knocking her off balance. "It's just art," he sneered. "Chill out." The bell rang, breaking the spell. The crowd dissolved, swirling around her, leaving Ellie standing alone in the hallway. She didn't move. She just stared at the ruined pieces of her work on the floor. The clock tower, torn in 2. She didn't cry. She was too shocked, too empty for tears. She was just a girl, silent in a hallway, surrounded by the wreckage of her only defense. The day after the hallway incident, Ellie took refuge in the art room. It was the only place at Harmony Creek High that felt neutral, a big, bright space that smelled of turpentine, clay, and the coffee from the ever-present mug on the teacher's desk. Mr. Albright, the art teacher, was a kind, rumpled man with paint on his shirts and charcoal stains on his hands. He'd seen Ellie come in, seen her pale face, and the way she clutched her damaged sketchbook. He was a man who understood that some things were better communicated through quiet work than forced conversations. He simply pointed to a pristine, untouched block of high-quality gray drawing paper on the supply shelf. "I think this has your name on it, Vance," he said softly. "Sometimes a new texture helps." Ellie had given him a grateful, watery look and hidden in the room, but the damage was done. The invisible armor she wore into the school had been cracked. Brody Kent had shown everyone she was a target who wouldn't, or couldn't, fight back. The next week was a cascade of quiet tortures. It was never overt, never enough to report. It was the accidental shove in a crowded hall that sent her books flying. It was the way her special, expensive set of imported charcoal pencils, a gift from her mother, was accidentally knocked off her desk, scattering and breaking under the heavy boot of Tyler, Brody's lineman shadow. Worst of all, her assigned canvas, which she had meticulously prepared with gesso, appeared one morning with an unidentifiable, greasy smear right in the center, ruining the surface. When she looked up, Brody and his friends were watching her from the hallway, their faces blank, enjoying the quiet panic that rose in her eyes. Ellie's world shrank. She ate lunch in the art room, pretending to work. She took long, inefficient routes between classes to avoid the main commons where the team congregated, and she stopped drawing for herself. The sketchbook, its torn page clumsily taped back in, stayed buried in her backpack. On Saturday, desperate to escape the house and her mother's worried, questioning glances, Ellie took her bag to the Harmony Grind, Harmony Creek's only real coffee shop. She took an aluminum table on the small outdoor patio, hoping the fresh country air would clear her head. She opened her book, took up a pencil, and tried to sketch the complex shadows of the streetlight on the sidewalk. Her hand was trembling. It wasn't a violent shake, but a slight, unnerving tremor that made her lines jagged and uncertain. She gripped the pencil harder, pressing the graphite to the page, but the shaking only worsened. A hot wave of shame washed over her. He had done this. Brody had taken this from her, too. She was so focused on her treacherous hand that she didn't see the man and his dog approaching on the sidewalk. Jax Riggs was on his way to a meeting with a local lawyer. Settling his estranged uncle's estate, the official reason for his leave, was turning into a mess of small-town legal procedure. Aries, walking beside him, was a picture of relaxed vigilance, his eyes scanning the street, his ears mobile. As they passed the coffee shop, Aries stopped. He didn't pull or lunge. He simply ceased all forward motion, his head cocked at an angle. He turned toward the patio, his intelligent eyes fixed on the girl at the table. He saw her, but more importantly, he smelled her. The familiar scent of graphite and paper was now laced with the acrid smell of a cortisol spike. Distress, he let out a low, quiet whine from deep in his chest. Jax stopped, his gaze following Aries's. He saw Alara Vance. He recognized her instantly from the park. He saw the sketchbook, the rigid posture, the way her knuckles were white from gripping the pencil. He saw the tremor in her hand. Jax was a man who understood the physiology of fear. He was trained to recognize it, to use it, and in his line of work, to cause it. Seeing it here in a civilian context, directed at a kid trying to draw, stirred something cold and unfamiliar in his chest. It was a discordant note in his highly ordered world. This wasn't a war zone. This was a high school. Ellie looked up, startled by the dog's sudden stillness. She met Aries's gaze. The dog just looked at her, steady and calm. Then she saw the man holding the leash. He was tall, dressed in simple jeans and a dark jacket, and he was looking at her, not with pity, but with a sharp, analytical focus that made her feel exposed all over again. Jax gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod, not of greeting, but of acknowledgement. He gave Aries's leash a slight two-fingered tug. "On," he said, his voice too low for Ellie to hear. Aries broke his stare and immediately fell into step beside his handler. They continued down the street, leaving Ellie alone with her trembling hand. The encounter unnerved her, but the dog's steady gaze had momentarily broken her anxiety loop. She took a deep breath and tried to draw one shaky line. The following Monday, Ellie was forced into the cafeteria. Mr. Albright had a department meeting and the art room was locked. The noise of the lunchroom was overwhelming, a chaotic roar of hundreds of conversations. Ellie found the smallest, most isolated table she could in a corner near the big windows overlooking the faculty parking lot. She kept her bag with her sketchbook squarely on her lap, hunched over her food. She lasted less than 5 minutes. "Well, look who it is, our artist in residence." Ellie's stomach dropped. Brody Kent was standing over her, tray in hand. Tyler and 2 other players fanned out behind him, blocking her exit. The ambient noise of the cafeteria seemed to fade, replaced by the thumping of her own heart. Brody sat down, uninvited, across from her. His friends remained standing, an intimidating wall. "I heard you were complaining to Albright," Brody said, his voice casual, but his eyes were hard. "Told him we messed up your little project." Ellie shook her head, her hair falling across her face. "No, I didn't." "Don't lie," Tyler growled, his voice a low rumble. "It's okay," Brody said, holding up a hand, silencing his friend. He smiled, but it was the same cold smile from the hallway. "I feel bad about your stuff. I want to make it up to you. Draw me something. Draw the team. We need a new mascot logo." Ellie stared at her tray. "I can't. I'm busy." "Busy?" Brody's voice lost its faux charm. "You're not busy. You're nothing, you're just that weird, quiet girl. Now give me the book. I'll hold on to it until you decide to be more cooperative." His hand shot out, not for her food, but straight for the backpack on her lap. He grabbed the strap. Ellie reacted on pure instinct. She clutched the bag, pulling it back. "No, stop. Get it, Brody," Tyler urged. Brody yanked. The bag tore from her grip, but before he could secure it, a sound cracked the air. It wasn't human. It was a single, concussive bark that echoed off the cafeteria windows, powerful enough to vibrate the glass. It wasn't a pet's bark. It was the sharp, territorial command of a trained military K-9. Every student in the cafeteria froze. Every head turned to the source. Brody, his hand still on Ellie's bag, looked out the window. Standing in the parking lot, no more than 30 yards away, next to a plain gray truck, was the man from the coffee shop. He was standing perfectly still, hands at his sides, watching. At his feet was the German Shepherd, alert, focused, and utterly silent, having already sent its message. Jax Riggs had just finished his meeting at the town hall across the street. He'd seen the gathering at the window, the posturing, the familiar, ugly geometry of predators cornering prey. He'd seen Brody grab for the bag, and he'd given Aries a discreet hand signal. Brody stared, his swagger gone. He recognized the man. He recognized the dog. He was the ruler of the school, but his instincts screamed that the man in the parking lot was something else entirely. Jax didn't move. He didn't yell. He just watched. The silent, unblinking observation was more menacing than any shout. Brody's face flushed red. He abruptly let go of Ellie's backpack, shoving it back at her. Whatever. He snapped, trying to recover his composure. It's probably all garbage anyway. He stood up, shoving his chair back. Let's go. This place stinks. Tyler and the others, clearly unnerved by the man and the dog, followed him without a word, melting back into the cafeteria crowd. Ellie was shaking, her heart racing from the confrontation and the sudden, shocking noise. She looked out the window, trying to process what had just happened. The man and his dog were gone. The parking spot was empty. She was left alone, confused, but for the first time in weeks, untouched. The cafeteria incident bought Ellie a strange, temporary peace. Brody Kent and his crew, clearly unnerved by the ferocious bark and the silent man in the parking lot, kept a curious distance. They looked at her differently, with a new, weary suspicion. Ellie didn't understand what had happened, why the man and the dog had been there, or if they had even been there for her, but she was grateful for the reprieve. This peace, however, made Mr. Albright's new assignment feel like a trap. Architecture and negative space, he announced, tapping a slide on the projector. I want you to find the beauty in the structures we take for granted. A staircase, a fire escape, the stadium bleachers. Ellie's heart sank. The stadium, that was Brody's kingdom. I want you to capture the stillness, Mr. Albright continued, his passion evident. The stadium, for instance. It's built for motion, for crowds. But I want you to find its opposite. Find the quiet. Find the geometry. The project was a major part of their grade. And art was the only class where Ellie felt she had a foothold. She couldn't fail it. She spent 2 days agonizing, her anxiety building a wall she couldn't seem to climb. She couldn't go during the day, not during gym classes. And she certainly couldn't go during football practice. Finally, she formed a plan. Friday evening, practice would be over. The weekend would be starting. The stadium would be empty, locked, and she could sketch it from the perimeter fence. Safe. That same afternoon, Jax Riggs pulled his plain gray truck into a deserted gravel lot behind the high school, far from the student parking areas. His family leave was dragging on, bogged down in probate court and lawyers. He was restless, his muscles tight, his mind craving the sharp, clean focus of physical exhaustion. He'd found the stadium 2 days before. It was perfect. The bleachers offered unforgiving, varied heights for lunges and box jumps, and the track was a controlled loop for endurance runs. At this time of day, it was always deserted. Stay, he commanded, his voice low. Aries hopped down from the passenger seat and immediately sat at the base of the gate, his gaze sweeping the empty field. He was the perfect sentry. Jax, wearing a heavyweight vest under a sweatshirt, slipped through an unlocked service gate, his movements economical and silent. He found a shadowed section of the visitors' bleachers, dark, out of sight, and with a clear view of the entire field. He began his workout, a grueling, repetitive series of stair climbs. Every movement was precise, his breathing controlled. He and Aries were ghosts, present, but unseen. Ellie arrived 45 minutes later, just as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of peach and lavender. The long, dramatic shadows were exactly what she'd hoped for. She walked toward the stadium, her new sketchbook clutched in her arms. Her relief was immediate and immense when she saw the main parking lot was empty. Practice was over. She pulled on the main gate, expecting it to be locked. It swung open with a small squeal. She hesitated. This was a change of plans. But the light was perfect. She could go inside, sit in the stands, and capture the perspective Mr. Albright wanted. She checked the parking lot again. Empty. It's fine, she told herself. I'll be quick. She slipped inside, the gate closing behind her with a soft thud. The silence of the empty stadium was vast, almost reverent. She chose a spot on the home team's bleachers, about halfway up, with a perfect, sweeping view of the empty field and the opposing stands. She sat, opened her book, and took a deep breath. For the first time in weeks, the air didn't feel thick and heavy. It felt peaceful. She picked up her charcoal pencil, and her hand was perfectly steady. She began to draw, and she was lost. The world of Brody, of the cafeteria, of her own trembling hands, it all fell away. There was only the angle of the benches, the deep black of the shadows under the stairs, the sharp line of a goalpost against a brilliant sky. She was not a victim, not a ghost. She was an artist. She was in control. She was so absorbed in her work she didn't hear the distant slam of a locker room door. She didn't hear the clatter of cleats on the concrete tunnel. She didn't hear the low, sudden murmur of male voices. She only registered them when the laughter started, sharp and sudden, echoing in the empty stadium. Ellie froze, her head snapping up. Down on the field near the tunnel was the football team. They hadn't left. They were finishing a late Friday practice. Brody Kent, helmet off and hair damp with sweat, was in the center of the group. He was laughing at a joke until Tyler, the lineman, suddenly pointed, "Hey, Brody, look." Brody's eyes followed Tyler's finger up into the stands. His laughter died. He saw her. Ellie was paralyzed. A deer in the headlights of the entire team. Brody's face, which had been relaxed, hardened. He remembered the cafeteria. He remembered the dog and the strange man who had shamed him in some unspoken way. And now the cause of it was here, invading his territory. Well, he said, his voice carrying in the still air. Look who came to watch us practice. The entire team's attention focused on her, a collective, menacing spotlight. Go home, Brody, one of the other players said, clearly tired. Let's go. In a minute, Brody said, his eyes never leaving Ellie. He spotted the large, orange Gatorade cooler near the bench, the kind used for ice baths and hydration. It was still half full of melted ice and frigid water. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. You guys, be quiet, he ordered. He picked up the heavy cooler. Ellie, seeing his intention, scrambled to gather her things. Her hand was shaking again, fumbling with her charcoal sticks. No, please, she whispered, but the field was too far away. She tried to stand, but her legs felt weak. Brody moved with an athlete's speed. He didn't take the main stairs. He jogged to the side and started climbing the bleachers, taking them 3 at a time, using the bank of seats below her to mask his approach. He was silent, fast, and determined. Ellie finally got her bag on, sketchbook in hand, and turned to run up the stairs, but he was already there. He was standing 2 steps above her, blocking her escape. Hey, Vance, he said, his voice sickly sweet. You look all hot from drawing. You really need to cool off. Ellie looked up into his cold blue eyes and she saw the complete absence of humanity in them. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. He lifted the cooler and inverted it. The shock of the ice water was absolute. It wasn't just water. It was ice. Chunks of it, hitting her head, her shoulders, her back. The frigid cold stole her breath, forcing a choked gasp from her lungs. It soaked her instantly, her hoodie, her jeans, her hair plastered to her scalp in a painful, dripping mat. The sketchbook, her new work, was ruined. The charcoal lines bled into a gray, watery mess. She collapsed onto the aluminum bench, shivering, not from the cold, but from pure, unadulterated shock. On the field, the team erupted. It wasn't just laughter. It was a primal roar of approval. They hooted, they whistled, they cheered, celebrating their quarterback's victory. And on the other side of the field, in the deep shadows of the visitors' stands, the workout had stopped. Jax Riggs stood at his full height, his weight vest making him an imposing silhouette against the dying light. He had seen all of it. Aries, at his side, was not sitting. He was standing rigid, a low, continuous growl vibrating deep in his chest. Jax's jaw was clenched so tight it ached. His hands were fists at his sides. He watched the boy, Brody, preen and laugh, taking a mock bow for his teammates. He watched the girl, Ellie, sit unmoving, a small, dark, drenched figure in a stadium full of enemies. It was a calculated act of cruelty, and Jax Riggs recognized it for what it was. It wasn't a high school prank. It was an assault. The cold was the first thing Ellie registered, a brutal, paralyzing shock that knocked the air from her lungs. The second was the sound. The roar from the football team was deafening, a triumphant, mocking wave of laughter that crashed over her, pinning her in place as surely as the frigid deluge. She was soaked to the bone. Chunks of ice were sliding down the back of her hoodie. Her ruined sketchbook, the pages now a gray pulp of charcoal and water, slipped from her numb fingers and landed with a wet slap on the metal bleacher. Ellie just sat there, gasping, her whole body racked with violent, uncontrollable shivers. The humiliation was a physical weight pressing on her chest, hotter and more painful than the ice. Brody Kent stood over her, the empty orange cooler still in his hand. He was grinning, his face flushed with adrenaline and pride as he listened to the cheers of his team. He was a king, and he had just performed for his court. "What's the matter, Vance?" he taunted, his voice dripping with false concern. "You look a little stressed. I told you to cool off." The laughter from the field grew louder. Energized by their leader's success, the team's taunts began to fly. "She's crying," one of them yelled, though Ellie was too stunned for tears. "Hey, ghost girl, you seeing ghosts?" Tyler, the lineman, picked up an empty paper cup from the sideline and crushed it. "Hey, Brody, go long." He threw it, and it bounced weakly off Ellie's shoulder. This started a new, chaotic game. Other players started grabbing discarded wraps, empty cups, and bits of trash, lobbing them up into the stands toward her. They were harmless paper projectiles, but they felt like stones. Each one was a fresh jab of degradation. Ellie tried to make herself smaller, drawing her knees to her chest, her hands covering her head as the paper rain fell around her. She was trapped. Brody watched, laughing, enjoying the spectacle. He dropped the cooler with a loud clatter, and took a step down toward her, his intention clear. He wasn't finished. And then the laughter stopped. It didn't fade. It was cut off as if by a knife. A single voice on the field near the back yelled, Brody." The voice was high, tight with sudden alarm. Brody paused, annoyed at the interruption. "What? Dude, look." Brody turned and froze. Something was on the field. It had come from the far side, from the shadows of the visitors' bleachers, and it was moving impossibly fast. It wasn't a person. It was a dog. A very large, very dark German shepherd, running with a silent, fluid, predatory grace. It wasn't barking. It wasn't growling. It was just coming. Its paws made almost no sound on the turf as it crossed the 50, the 40, the 30-yard line, its eyes locked on the bleachers. The team scattered, backing away in sudden fear. This was no pet. Aries reached the home bleachers in seconds. He didn't slow down. He took the first few concrete steps in a single, powerful leap and then bounded up the aluminum rows, his claws scrabbling on the metal. He reached Ellie's row and planted himself. He didn't look at her. He faced her tormentors. He stood directly between Ellie and Brody, his body a rigid wall of muscle and fur. He still made no sound. He just stood there, head high, gaze locked on Brody, and began a low, almost subsonic growl that vibrated through the metal of the stands. Brody, who seconds before had been the picture of arrogance, was now chalk white. He was cut off by the dog from below, and Ellie was above him. He had nowhere to go. Nice doggy," he stammered, holding up his hands. The dog ignored him, its growl deepening. Then they saw the man. He was walking, not running, emerging from the same shadows the dog had. He wore a dark weight vest over a sweatshirt, and he moved with an absolute economy of purpose. He didn't yell. He didn't call his dog. He just walked, crossing the field, his boots silent on the grass. The team was paralyzed, watching the scene unfold. Jax Riggs didn't look at Brody. He didn't look at the team. His eyes were locked on Ellie. He came up the stairs, his pace never changing, and stopped just short of his dog. "Stand," he said, his voice low, but carrying absolute authority. Aries's growl stopped instantly, but he did not move. Jax looked at Ellie. She was still huddled, shivering, her head down. She had seen none of it. She was lost in a world of cold and fear. "Miss Vance," he said. Ellie flinched at the sound of a new voice. She looked up, her eyes wide and terrified, her hair plastered to her face. She saw the dog, then the man, an imposing dark shape blocking out the rest of the light. A new wave of panic started to rise, but the man's eyes weren't cold like Brody's. They were focused. He didn't speak to Brody. He simply reached up, unzipped his heavy black sweatshirt, and shrugged it off, revealing the weight vest and a plain t-shirt beneath. The cool evening air hit his skin instantly, but he didn't seem to notice. He took the sweatshirt. It was large, warm, and dry, and with a surprising gentleness, he draped it over Ellie's small, shaking shoulders. It enveloped her like a heavy, protective blanket. "You're okay," he murmured, his voice for her alone. Then he placed one hand on Aries's head, a silent command. He turned. For the first time, Jax Riggs acknowledged Brody Kent. He didn't speak. He didn't threaten. He just looked. His gaze was steady, analytical, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was the look of a professional assessing a situation, a look that had been honed in the most dangerous places on earth. In that single, silent look, Jax took the measure of Brody Kent, his entitlement, his cruelty, his casual violence, and dismissed him as nothing. Brody, who thrived on loud, angry confrontations, had no defense for this. He couldn't meet the man's eyes. He looked away, his face burning with a mixture of fear and shame. "Watch," Jack said. It was one word. It was not directed at Brody. It was for Aries. The dog sat, its eyes locked on Brody, a silent promise of consequence. "Let's go," Brody mumbled to his team, his voice cracking. He practically fell down the bleachers in his haste to get away, grabbing for his helmet as he ran. Tyler and the others didn't need to be told twice. They scrambled, tripping over each other, grabbing their gear and sprinting for the locker room tunnel, casting terrified glances back at the man and the dog who remained motionless in the stands. Within 30 seconds, the stadium was silent again. They were gone. Jack stood there, a sentry in the twilight, until the last sound of the locker room door slamming echoed across the empty field. Only then did he turn his attention back to the girl huddled in his sweatshirt. The stadium was utterly silent. The only sounds were the drip of water from the bleachers onto the concrete below and the uncontrollable chattering of Ellie's teeth. She was dimly aware of the man, Jax, standing before her, a silent, unmoving guard. His sweatshirt was warm, a heavy fleece-lined fortress against the biting cold, and it smelled faintly of laundry soap and the clean scent of outdoor air. "Can you stand?" he asked. His voice wasn't gentle, but it was steady, a solid object in the chaos of her mind. It was a question, but it felt like a command. Ellie nodded, her teeth clicking together too hard to speak. She used the bench to pull herself up, her legs trembling, her soaked jeans feeling like weights. Jax turned and with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his imposing frame, he picked up her ruined sketchbook from the wet metal. He made no comment on the gray, pulpy mass of the pages. He just held it. "Come on," he said. He gestured toward the stairs. Aries, who had been sitting perfectly, rose in a single fluid motion. Jax started down the steps and the dog automatically fell into place on Ellie's left side, walking so close his fur brushed her leg, a silent, warm presence. Jax walked on her other side. They were escorting her, flanking her like a security detail, shielding her from the vast emptiness of the stadium. The walk to his truck, the same plain gray truck from the cafeteria parking lot, was the longest walk of Ellie's life. She was aware of every squelching sound her wet sneakers made on the pavement. He opened the passenger door and she climbed in, huddling inside the big sweatshirt. Aries hopped into the extended cab behind her, settling onto a mat with the quiet sigh of a creature who has just finished a job. Jax got in, started the engine, and immediately blasted the heater on high. The sudden roar of the fan made Ellie jump, and a blast of hot, dry air hit her face and frozen hands. He put the truck in gear and pulled out of the gravel lot. "I need your address," Ellie told him, her voice a tiny croak. They drove in silence, the only sound the click of the wipers Jax had turned on to clear the condensation from her wet clothes. Ellie stared straight ahead, her mind a blank slate of shock. Then she felt a soft pressure against her elbow. She looked down. Aries had pushed his big, noble head between the two front seats. He was looking at her, his brown eyes intelligent and impossibly calm. He nudged her hand. Timidly, her fingers still numb. She reached out and touched the top of his head. His fur was thick and soft. He leaned into her touch, letting out another silent sigh. A single, choked sob escaped Ellie's throat, the first sound she'd made since the assault. "His name is Aries," Jax said, his voice low, his eyes on the road. Ellie's hand stilled. She stroked the dog's ear. "Thank you," she whispered, not sure if she was speaking to the man or the dog. "He's a good partner," Jax replied, accepting the thanks on Aries's behalf. The simple, unemotional exchange broke a spell. Is he a police dog?" she asked, her voice stronger. Jax glanced at her, then back at the road. "Something like that. He was the one barking at the cafeteria." It wasn't a question, it was a realization. That was him. "He barks on command," Jax said simply. The confirmation settled in her. This man, this stranger, had seen what was happening. He had helped her twice. They turned onto her street, a quiet little lane of small, well-kept houses. As the truck pulled into her driveway, the front door flew open before Ellie could even unbuckle her seatbelt. Rachel Vance, her mother, ran out onto the porch, her face a mask of worry. She was still in her blue nursing scrubs, her hair pulled back in a practical, messy bun. She saw Ellie, drenched, climbing out of a strange man's truck, wrapped in a giant sweatshirt that was clearly not her own. "Ellie. Oh my God, what happened? Are you hurt?" Rachel's voice was sharp with a nurse's diagnostic terror, her eyes scanning for blood. I'm I'm okay, Mom, Ellie stammered, the heavy sweatshirt slipping from her shoulders. I fell in the creek. It was a terrible lie, but it was all she had. Jax had gotten out and walked around the truck. He stood at a respectful distance, the ruined sketchbook still in his hand. Aries remained in the truck, a silent observer. Ma'am, Jax said, his voice calm and authoritative, cutting through Rachel's rising panic. My name is Jax Riggs. Your daughter had an incident at the school stadium. She isn't injured, but she's very cold. Rachel's gaze shifted from Ellie to Jax. She took in the man, his military bearing, his steady eyes, and then the ruined, sopping book in his hand. As a mother, she understood instantly the lie about the creek, the sweatshirt, the stadium. Everything clicked into place, her panic shifted to a cold, protective fury. Thank you, Mr. Riggs, she said, her voice tight. Thank you for bringing her home. Just Jax is fine, he said. He held out the sketchbook. She should get in a hot shower immediately. Rachel took the pulpy book, her heart breaking at the sight of the ruined artwork. Ellie, go. She commanded. Now, as hot as you can stand it. Ellie, caught between the two adults, nodded and fled inside, leaving a trail of wet footprints. Rachel turned back to Jax. An incident? Jax met her eyes directly. A group of boys on the football team. Their leader is Brody Kent. Rachel's eyes closed for a brief second. She knew the name. Everyone in town did. I see. I don't know how to thank you. No, thanks are necessary, ma'am, he said. Just make sure she gets warm. He was about to turn away when Ellie reappeared at the threshold, wrapped in a thick bathrobe, her hair in a towel. She was holding his damp, crumpled sweatshirt. This is yours, she said, holding it out. Jax walked to the steps to take it. As he did, he was still holding her sketchbook, which Rachel had handed back to him during the exchange. He glanced down at the ruined cover, his thumb brushing away a wet leaf. He opened it, perhaps to see the extent of the damage. The top pages were a total loss, a gray, watery mess. The drawing of the stadium was gone, but as he gently separated the stuck-together pages, he uncovered a drawing near the back of the book. It was older, done on a different, crisper type of paper, and it was mostly dry. It was a red-tailed hawk caught mid-dive. It wasn't just a drawing of a bird. It was a study in intensity. Ellie had captured the predator's absolute, terrifying focus, the angle of the wings, the tension in the talons, the pinpoint concentration of the eye. Ellie blushed, embarrassed. That's just an old one. Jack stared at the page, a flicker of genuine surprise in his eyes. He tapped his finger on the bird's head. This, he said, his voice quiet. You didn't just draw what it looks like. You drew what it's doing. Ellie, still toweling her hair, looked at the drawing. It's just focusing on something on the ground, I guess. That's right, Jack said. He looked up from the page and met her eyes. You saw its intent. You have a great eye, Ellie. A disciplined eye. That's rare. He wasn't complimenting her talent. He was acknowledging her skill. He was talking to her like a peer, like a fellow observer. He gently closed the book and handed it to her. That's a strength, he said, his voice firm. Don't let anyone take that from you. He stepped back. He gave a short, respectful nod to Rachel. Ma'am. Then he turned, walked to his truck, and in one fluid motion, he and Aries were inside. The truck started, backed out quietly, and was gone. Ellie stood on the threshold, the warm air from the house washing over her, clutching her ruined sketchbook. She wasn't thinking about the ice or the laughter. She was thinking about a hawk, and she was thinking about the word strength. The incident at the stadium detonated in the halls of Harmony Creek High with the force of a sonic boom. By first period on Monday, there were two starkly opposing narratives. The first, loudest, and most dominant was Brody Kent's. It was insane, he recounted to an attentive crowd by his locker. He wasn't yelling. He was performing, his voice low and serious. We were finishing up drills and she was just there, in the stand staring at us. It was creepy. I went up to ask her to leave, it was a closed practice, and she freaked out, slipped, and knocked the water cooler all over herself. But what about the dog? Someone asked. Brody's face darkened, taking on a look of noble, violated bravery. That's the crazy part. This giant military-looking dude comes out of nowhere. I mean, out of the shadows. He's got this massive attack dog. Looked like a wolf. He sicked it on us, threatened the whole team. We had to run for the locker rooms. I'm telling you, that guy is dangerous. And her, he shook his head, she was in on it. They set us up. This story, told by the town's golden boy, spread like wildfire. Ellie walked to her first class and felt the shift immediately. The whispers weren't just mocking anymore, they were laced with fear and accusation. She wasn't ghost girl anymore. She was crazy girl, set up girl. But there was a second, quieter story. It started as a digital whisper, a file shared via text message. A new player had emerged, though she was rarely seen. Her name was Maya Lin. Maya was a junior with sharp, intelligent eyes and a perpetually curious expression who ran the school's unofficial, and far more popular, online blog. She had the heart of a journalist and a healthy skepticism for manufactured narratives. The video, shot by a band member who had been packing up his instrument, was grainy and taken from a distance, but it was undeniable. It didn't show Ellie slipping. It showed Brody Kent, clear as day, hoisting the orange cooler. It showed him climbing the steps. It showed him standing over her, taunting, and then deliberately, triumphantly, dumping ice water over her head. The sound was terrible, but the team's roaring laughter was perfectly, chillingly clear. Maya posted the video. She wrote no commentary. She just titled it, "The Stadium, Friday." By lunch, the school was fiercely divided. The video didn't show the man or the dog. It only showed the assault. Brody's story of being threatened still held power, but his claim that Ellie had slipped was now a verifiable lie. Ellie felt none of this. She had spent the weekend in a strange, hyper-focused state. She had washed and dried Jax's heavy sweatshirt, folding it meticulously. His words, a disciplined eye, echoed in her head. On Saturday evening, she had found the address. It was a small, unassuming rental house on the edge of town, the kind used for temporary stays. She walked up the path, her heart thumping, the folded sweatshirt in her arms. She almost turned back, but before she could, the door opened. Jax was there, holding a box labeled estate files. He wasn't in tactical gear. He was just a man in jeans and a t-shirt. He saw her and nodded, his expression unreadable.
I washed this," Ellie said, offering the sweatshirt.
"Thanks," Jax said, taking it. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did." She looked past him. Aries was sitting in the hallway, watching her. "And I wanted to thank him, too." Aries's tail gave a single, solid thump on the floor. "My mom, she wanted to thank you, too," Ellie continued, finding a new, shaky courage. "She wanted to know if maybe I could walk Aries around the block. She trusts him." Jax looked at her for a long moment. He was assessing her, not her request. He was checking her posture, her eyes. He seemed to find what he was looking for. "He needs to clear his head." "So do you. Wait here." He returned with a leash. It was thick, heavy-duty nylon. He clipped it to Aries's collar. "He doesn't pull. He heals. He's your partner, not your pet. Your job is to observe. His job is to watch. Understand?" "Yes," Ellie said. For the next half hour, Alara Vance walked through Harmony Creek, and for the first time, she felt solid. Aries moved at her left hip, a silent, powerful, easy presence. His head was high, his ears alert. He was not a threat, but he was the promise of one. People saw the dog first, his military bearing, his sheer size, and then they saw her. She saw Tyler, Brody's lineman friend, coming out of the grocery store. Their eyes met. Tyler's gaze immediately dropped to the dog. He stopped, did a visible calculation, and then abruptly crossed the street, pulling out his phone to avoid looking at them. Ellie's hand tightened on the leash, not in fear, but in astonishment. She hadn't done anything. She hadn't said anything. She was just there, and the world had parted for her. It was a profound, intoxicating feeling. Her newfound confidence carried her through Monday, even with the whispers. The video had given her an alibi, and the memory of walking Aries had given her a layer of armor. She saw Jax one last time on Tuesday morning. He was loading the last of the boxes into his truck. His leave was over. Ellie felt a sudden, sharp pang of panic. Her protector, her silent sentry, was leaving. "You're going?" she asked, stopping on the sidewalk. "Mission's over," he said, tightening a strap. "Oh." Ellie looked down at her shoes. "Well, thank you. For everything." Jax finished his knot and turned to her. He saw the flicker of fear return to her eyes. "I'm leaving," he said. "But the lesson isn't." "The lesson?" "You're an artist," he said. "Your strength is your eye. You see things, but you've been using it to hide. You look at the ground. You look at your paper. You look away." He took a step closer. "You need situational awareness." "What's that?" "It's seeing the world before it sees you. You walk down a hallway. What do you see? You see your feet. I see the reflection in the trophy case. I see who's at the end of the hall before I get there. I see which doors are open. I see the janitor's cart that wasn't there this morning. You have the ability. He tapped his temple. You just have to use it. Walk with your head up. Observe. Know your exits. Know who's watching. Ellie nodded, absorbing it. It felt like the most important art lesson she'd ever received. Second thing, he said, is your presence. You walk like you're apologizing for taking up space. Shoulders back, head up.
I try, she whispered.
No, he said, his voice sharp but not unkind. Trying doesn't work. Doing works. You have a voice. You just don't use it. He whistled. Aries, who had been sitting by the truck, trotted over. Tell him to sit, Jax said. Ellie looked at the dog. Aries. Sit, please. Aries cocked his head, looking from her to Jax, confused by the question. He doesn't understand, please, Jax said. He understands a command. He needs to know you mean it. Your voice is a tool just like your pencil. Use it. Ellie took a breath. She thought of Tyler crossing the street. She thought of Jax's hawk. She stood up straight, squared her shoulders. She looked the dog directly in his intelligent eyes. She used her diaphragm the way she had inquired before her dad died. Aries, sit. Her voice was clear, crisp, and absolute. Aries's hindquarters hit the pavement instantly. He sat, his gaze locked on her, waiting for the next command. Ellie's jaw dropped a little. A thrill more powerful than the walk ran through her. Jax nodded, a rare, thin smile touching the corner of his mouth. See? You have the tools. You're not a victim, Ellie. You're an observer. Be one. He gave Aries one last pat and the dog hopped into the truck. Jax got in, closing the door with a solid thud. Stay steady, Alara Vance, he said through the open window. And then he was gone. Ellie stood on the sidewalk for a long time, the sound of the engine fading. She was alone again, but this time, she was different. She looked up past her house and observed the world. Jax was gone, and the fragile bubble of safety he and Aries had provided was gone with him. Alara Vance was on her own. The school was a minefield. The video Maya Lin had posted had gone viral within the student community, but it had only hardened the battle lines. The athletes and their followers doubled down on Brody's story, that the video was edited and the real story was about the scary stranger who had threatened them. Ellie, they argued, was just the bait. Ellie, for the first time, was practicing situational awareness. She walked with her head up. She kept her shoulders back. She observed. She saw the reflections in the trophy cases. She saw how the groups in the hallway parted, some students looking at her with pity or curiosity, and others, Brody's friends, looking at her with open hostility. She saw Tyler, the lineman, spot her from across the cafeteria, whisper to his friends, and then deliberately lead them in a different direction. They were wary, but she knew it wouldn't last. The real ticking clock was her art assignment. The stadium sketch, now a pulpy memory, was ruined, but it was still due. That evening, she sat at her kitchen table, her brand new sketchbook open to a blank page. Her mother, Rachel, sat across from her, a cold, determined anger in her eyes that Ellie rarely saw. I'm calling the school board tomorrow, Ellie, Rachel said, her voice clipped. I'm meeting with the principal. That boy, Brody Kent, cannot be allowed. No. Rachel stopped, surprised. Ellie looked up from the blank page. Her voice was quiet, but it wasn't the whisper of a victim. It was the clear, steady voice she had used with Aries. It won't work, Mom, Ellie said. He's Brody Kent. His family owns half of Harmony Creek. They'll say he's just a kid, that I'm new, that I'm too sensitive. They'll believe his story. We need proof that he won't stop. The video, Ellie. That's proof. It's proof of one time. He'll say it was a joke that went too far. Ellie closed her sketchbook. I have to go back. I have to finish the assignment. Rachel's face went pale with horror. Absolutely not. You are not setting foot in that stadium again. I have to, Ellie insisted, but I'm going to do it my way, and I need your help. You're right to go to the school. But don't go to the board. Go to the principal. The next morning, Rachel Vance, in her crisp nursing uniform, sat in Principal Thompson's office. Mr. Thompson was a man who seemed perpetually tired, his shoulders slumped, his primary goal in any situation a return to a state of calm. He had seen the video, and he was clearly uncomfortable. Mrs. Vance, I understand your concern, he said, steepling his fingers. But Brody, while perhaps a bit overzealous, is one of our student leaders. I've spoken with him, and he assures me it was an accident. He's lying, Rachel said flatly. She placed her phone on his desk. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because my daughter's art project, which you are forcing her to complete, requires her to return to the stadium. She will be there today at 3:00 p.m. during the school's activity period to finish it. Since she was assaulted there the last time, I am officially requesting that you and the athletic director ensure her safety. Principal Thompson blanched. This was a liability nightmare. Well, I can assure you that practice doesn't start until. I also ask that Coach Callahan be present for this meeting. Right on cue, the door opened and Coach Callahan walked in. He was a stark contrast to Thompson, a burly man in his 50s with the posture of a drill sergeant and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He was a hard man who valued loyalty and winning above all else. Coach, thank you for coming, Thompson said, clearly flustered. Thompson, Callahan grunted, not sparing the principal a glance. His focus was on Rachel. Ma'am, I heard your complaint. I want to be very clear. My boys are disciplined. They don't assault people. Then you'll want to see this, Rachel said. She didn't play the grainy band video. She played a new one. One she had taken herself on her phone of her daughter hours after the incident, shaking so badly she couldn't hold a mug of tea. Coach Callahan watched, his jaw tightening. That, Rachel said, is not an accident. That's hypothermia and humiliation. Now here is the video from the stadium. Callahan watched the second video. He saw his star quarterback, the boy he trusted, lie. He saw him act not like a leader, but like a thug, and he saw his entire team cheer. He told me she slipped, Callahan said, his voice low and dangerous. She's going back today at 3, Rachel repeated, her voice like steel. To finish her work. Will you be there? At 3:05 p.m., Alara Vance walked into the stadium. She didn't hide. She didn't sketch from the fence. She was carrying a full-sized wooden easel and a large, stretched canvas. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs, but she focused on Jax's words. Shoulders back, head up, observe. She observed the empty field. She observed the exits. She set up her easel on the 10-yard line, facing the stands. It was the most public, defiant place she could have chosen. She was not a ghost. She was here. She began to sketch, forcing her hand to be steady. It took 10 minutes. She heard them before she saw them. The click of cleats on pavement. Brody Kent and his core crew, Tyler and 2 others, emerged from the tunnel. They were out of uniform. They stopped when they saw her. Tyler laughed, a sharp, nervous sound. You've got to be kidding me. She came back. Brody stared. This wasn't the frightened girl from the cafeteria. This was a statement. This was a challenge. In his stadium. He saw the easel, the canvas, and his face contorted in a mask of rage. You think you're funny? He yelled, his voice echoing. Ellie didn't look up. Her charcoal pencil kept moving. Observe. Do not engage. Control the space. This enraged him further. He started walking toward her, his pace quickening. His friends followed, fanning out. I'm talking to you, Brody snarled, his voice loud. He was only a few feet away. You and your crazy boyfriend think you can threaten us? You think you can post that video and lie? Ellie took a slow, deep breath, the way Jax had taught her. She put her charcoal stick down. She turned, not cringing, and faced him. You're in my drawing, Brody, she said, her voice clear. You're blocking the light. For a second, Brody was stunned by her sheer lack of fear. Then his face turned purple. You think this is a joke? He lunged, not at her, but at her art. His hand reached out to grab the canvas, to break the easel, to destroy her work. Don't touch my things. Ellie's voice wasn't a plea. It wasn't a request. It was a command. It was the voice she had used with Ares. It was sharp, clear, and absolute. And it stopped Brody cold, his hand hovering inches from the canvas. He was so shocked by the authority in her voice that he froze. And in that frozen moment, a new voice boomed across the stadium. Kent. Brody's head snapped around. The blood ran cold in his veins. Standing at the mouth of the tunnel, their faces like granite, were Principal Thompson and Coach Callahan. Coach Callahan walked onto the field, his stride deliberate, his eyes boring into his quarterback. She told you to stop. I heard it. We all heard it. Brody's arrogance evaporated, replaced by a desperate, panic scramble. Coach, it's not what it looks like. She lies. She set us up. You told me she slipped, Callahan said, his voice dangerously quiet. He was standing right in front of Brody now, who was a head taller, but seemed to shrink. You lied to your team and you lied to me. You stood there and you lied. Coach, please. You embarrassed this program, son, Callahan said, his disgust palpable. You acted like a coward, and I don't coach cowards. He turned to Principal Thompson. He's all yours. Principal Thompson, no longer weak, stepped forward. He had a witness. He had the video. He had the full backing of the athletic department. He was safe. Brody Kent, Thompson said, his voice formal. You are suspended from this school, effective immediately, pending a full expulsion hearing. You will be escorted to my office to wait for your parents. Brody's world collapsed. He looked at Tyler, at his friends. They looked away, horrified, suddenly detached. He looked at Ellie, who stood steady, her hands at her sides. She wasn't a trap. She was just a mirror, and in it, they had all seen exactly who he was. The package arrived at a forward operating base thousands of miles from the pine-scented air of Colorado. The air here was thick, tasting of dust, diesel, and sun-baked earth. Mail call was a rare, chaotic event, and Jax Riggs, his face lean and streaked with camouflage paint, accepted the battered cardboard box with a flicker of surprise. It wasn't from his lawyer. He took it back to his quarters, a small, austere space defined by concrete and canvas, and used his standard issue knife to slit the tape. Inside, nestled in an absurd amount of packing foam, was a rectangular object wrapped in brown paper. He unwrapped it. It was a framed oil painting. Jack set it against the gray wall and the small, bleak room was instantly transformed. It was Aries. But it wasn't just a portrait of a dog. It was a portrait of a sentry. Ellie had painted him as he had stood in the stadium, a sable-coated guardian in the dying light. She had captured the rigid set of his shoulders, the tension in his powerful haunches, the absolute, unwavering loyalty in his intelligent brown eyes. It was a painting of the moment just before the growl, the silent promise of action. She had done what he'd said. She hadn't just painted what he looked like. She had painted what he was doing. She had painted his intent. Jax Riggs, a man not given to outward displays of emotion, stared at the painting for a long time. A slow, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth. He picked up the frame, found a nail, and hung it on the wall. It was the only personal item in the room. Back in Harmony Creek, the snow had melted, and the deep, unforgiving blue of the mountain sky had softened. The departure of Brody Kent, whose family had quietly, angrily transferred him to a private academy out of state, had left a power vacuum at the high school. The hallways, for a few weeks, felt off balance. But Alara Vance no longer measured her days by the atmosphere of the hallways. She still walked with her head up. She still observed. But the observation was no longer a defensive tactic. It was an active, joyful engagement. She saw the way the morning light hit the trophy case, and now she sketched it because it was beautiful, not because she was hiding. Her art had changed. It was bolder. Her lines were confident, her shadows deeper. The idea for the art show came from Maya Lin, the school's investigative blogger, who had cornered Ellie in the art room. That video of Kent got more hits than anything I've ever posted, Maya said, leaning against a work table. But it only tells half the story. It shows what he did. It doesn't show what you did. I didn't do anything, Ellie said, adding a slash of white to a new canvas. You went back, Maya countered. You stood up to him, and now everyone knows the truth. But there are other ghosts in this school, Ellie. People who haven't found their voice. You should give them a place to find it. And so Finding a Voice was born. It wasn't a huge exhibition. It was held in the school library, curated by Ellie, Mr. Albright, and Maya. They put out a call for anonymous submissions, and the response was timid at first, then overwhelming. There was poetry from a boy in the marching band, angry, powerful verses about being invisible. There were photographs from a quiet girl on the yearbook staff, stunning, abstract close-ups of cracked paint and rusted fences. And there was the art. Ellie's own contribution was placed in the center. It was the piece she had started in the stadium, the one Brody had tried to destroy. She had finished it. It was a large charcoal and ink drawing, not of the empty bleachers, but of her own easel, standing defiant on the field. In the reflection of a puddle of water on the grass, she had drawn Brody's distorted, angry face, a portrait of a bully caught in the very water he had thrown. It was a masterpiece of perspective and subtle power. The show was a quiet, massive success. Students walked through the library, talking in hushed tones, pointing, reading, and recognizing a part of themselves on the walls. It did more to change the school's culture than any assembly or administrative decree ever could. Alara Vance, the girl who had been a ghost, had given a voice to the other ghosts. Weeks later, on a warm, bright Saturday, Ellie was in the park. It was the same park where Jax had first seen her, huddled on a bench, hiding from the world. Today, she wasn't hiding. She was the center of it. She sat on the grass, a large sketchbook open on her lap, surrounded by a chattering, wiggling circle of 6 elementary school kids. She had volunteered for a new Spring into Art program run by the community center. "Okay," she was saying, her voice warm and patient. "Who sees the squirrel over there? Don't just look at it. Observe it. See how its tail is always twitching? That means it's nervous. Let's try to draw that nervous feeling." A little girl with bright red pigtails, who had said almost nothing all morning, had frustration written all over her face. "I can't do it, my tree looks bad." Ellie looked at the drawing. "It's not bad at all. You have a great eye for texture, but you're holding your pencil like you're taking a test." She gently adjusted the girl's grip. "Hold it loose, like this. Be confident. The pencil knows what to do. You just have to let it." The little girl tried again, and the line was suddenly smoother. A small, surprised smile broke out on her face. "See," Ellie said, smiling back. In a brief moment of quiet, when all the kids were deeply focused on their new, confident lines, Ellie pulled her phone from her pocket. She had a new email from an anonymous, encrypted address she didn't recognize. She opened it. The email had no subject and no signature. It contained only 3 words. "Stay steady." Alara Vance looked up from the screen. She looked at the blue sky, at the sharp, beautiful peaks that no longer felt hostile, and at the circle of happy, noisy, creating children. A slow, steady smile spread across her face. It wasn't the tentative, uncertain smile of the girl who had been here months ago. It was the calm, sure smile of an artist, a teacher, a survivor. "Okay," she said, slipping her phone back into her pocket and turning to the girl with the pigtails. "Let's work on those shadows, shall we? You won't believe what we can do with them."